He found a young widow and baby sleeping beside his horse, then heard her whisper his late wife's name. The year was 1867, and the frontier lay stretched beneath a bruised sky, half light, half shadow, as though unsure which side of fate it meant to fall on. Caleb Rowan rode through that dying dusk with the steady patience of a man who had nowhere left to rush toward. His bay gelding, Flint, tossed its head now and then, ears pricking forward whenever the wind shifted. Caleb didn't blame the animal for its alertness. The plains had been uneasy all season, and every rider knew it. But tonight felt different. The silence wasn't the soft kind. It held a tightness, like something waiting to break. Caleb had learned to trust that kind of quiet. It had saved his life more times than he cared to count. So he scanned the land, hand drifting toward the worn revolver at his hip, and urged Flint down the narrow ravine that led toward the foothills where he planned to make camp. He was bone-tired, mind drifting toward old memories he wished he could scrape out himself. But then he heard something, soft at first, then unmistakable. A cry, a baby's cry. He pulled the reins hard, bringing Flint to a stiff halt. The gelding snorted, stamping nervously. Caleb listened again. The cry came from somewhere near the horse's hind legs, low to the ground. For a heartbeat he wondered if fatigue was playing tricks on him, but the sound rose again, thin, weak, desperate. He swung down from the saddle, boots hitting the earth with a dull thud. Keeping a hand on a rifle across his back, he stepped carefully toward the noise. The shadows were long and thick, but he could see enough. Someone, was curled in the dirt beside his saddlebags, half under Flint's flank. Caleb froze. It was a woman, a young woman. Clothes torn, hair tangled, body curled protectively around a small bundle pressed to her chest. She was asleep or unconscious. He couldn't tell. The baby burrowed against her, whimpering, face hot and flushed. Caleb moved closer, noting the dust clinging to her skin, the bruises darkening her jaw, and the exhaustion etched so deeply into her features he felt it like a punch to his own gut. Then, before he could speak, she stirred. Her lips parted in a faint whisper, and the name that slipped out stopped Caleb cold. Anna. He staggered back a step, breath punched from him. Anna, his wife's name. A name he had not heard spoken in 2 long years, not since the fever carried her off and left his world hollow to the bone. Hearing it now, on the lips of a stranger lying unconscious beside his horse, felt like a cruel trick of the night. He crouched, forcing himself to look at her more carefully. He didn't know her. He had never seen her. Yet something about her posture, protective, wounded, stubborn even in sleep, stirred an emotion he had worked hard to bury. The baby let out another weak cry. Flint sidestepped anxiously. Caleb snapped back to the present. He needed to wake her, and fast. There were tracks in the dirt he hadn't noticed before, fresh ones. Wagon ruts, boot prints, a single set of horse tracks heading north, and signs of struggle. Whoever this woman was, she had not gotten here by chance. He knelt beside her, keeping his voice low but firm. "Ma'am, wake up." Her eyelids fluttered, breath shallow. When she opened her eyes at last, the fear in them hit him like a blow. She recoiled instantly, clutching the baby so tightly he worried she'd suffocate it. Caleb lifted both hands in surrender. "Easy. You're safe. You're lying beside my horse. I don't mean you harm." Her gaze darted around, wild and disoriented, before settling on him. Her voice cracked when she spoke. Where am I?" She pulled the baby closer. "Please, don't take him." Caleb shook his head. "I ain't taking anything. But you're hurt, and the child sounds half-starved. Tell me your name." She hesitated, swallowing hard. "Mara," she whispered. "Mara Ellison." Caleb nodded once. "All right, Mara. What happened to you?" She closed her eyes briefly, as though deciding whether he deserved the truth. When she opened them, pain sharpened her expression. "My husband, we were headed west. We were attacked 2 nights ago near the canyon. He tried to fight them off." Her breath hitched. He didn't make it. Caleb felt a familiar heaviness settle in his chest. Loss recognized loss, even across silence. But something about her story didn't sit square. He had seen the tracks, the evidence of struggle, but there was something else lurking in her eyes, a shadow, a secret or two she wasn't ready to reveal. Still, the baby's thin wailing left no room for interrogations. Caleb reached for his canteen and offered it. Mara hesitated only a moment before taking a small sip, then wetting the baby's lips. The child quieted almost instantly. Caleb watched her, noticing the tremor in her hands, the exhaustion clouding her movements. She had been walking for days. That much was clear. Her boots were worn to tatters, and the soles of her feet showed through. He studied her again, wondering how she'd ended up right beside his horse, half under its belly. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. Mara shifted the baby and lowered her gaze. "I followed the horse," she murmured. "I saw in a dream. A bay horse. And a woman with sunlit hair telling me to follow it." Caleb stiffened. His heart hammered unexpectedly. Anna. Anna had hair like that, golden, bright, even in winter light. He forced himself to keep his voice steady. "And that's why you said her name." "Anna." Mara blinked, confusion flickering through her expression. "Did I say that?" Caleb nodded once. She swallowed, looking troubled. "I didn't know her name. Just that she kept telling me to follow the horse, that it would take me where I needed to go." Caleb didn't answer. Couldn't. He stood abruptly, glancing again at the tracks. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong, in the way the boot prints circled, then vanished. Whoever had attacked her wasn't far. He scanned the ravine walls. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faintest crunch of movement. Caleb's instincts sharpened. "Get up," he said quietly. "We're not alone." Mara paled. She clutched the baby and struggled to her feet. Caleb grabbed her arm, steadied her, and guided her toward the rock outcropping. Flint stamped again, ears pinned. Then the shot came. It cracked through the ravine like lightning, ricocheting off stone. Caleb grabbed Mara and shoved her behind a fallen juniper trunk, just as another bullet sparked against the rock. "Keep your head down," he barked. He drew his revolver, eyes scanning. A shadow shifted near the ridge. A rifle barrel glinted. Caleb fired once, twice. Short, sharp shots meant to force the attacker back. Mara pressed the baby against her chest, eyes wide with terror. Caleb kept firing until he saw the dark figure scramble and retreat behind the rocks. Hoofbeats exploded moments later, fading fast. Whoever it was, they'd come close, too close, and they'd return. He holstered his gun, breathing hard. Mara stared at him, trembling. "They're hunting me," she whispered. "They won't stop." Caleb nodded stiffly. "Then we ride. Now." He didn't trust her fully. She didn't trust him either. But the baby was deteriorating fast, and the land offered no mercy to the weak. Caleb lifted her onto Flint, securing her with a blanket. The child whimpered, too exhausted to even cry. Mara looked down at Caleb. Fear and gratitude tangled in her expression. "Why are you helping us?" Caleb tightened the saddle straps, jaw clenched. "Because you'll die out here otherwise. And I can't ride away from that. Not again. Not after Anna." Without another word, he took Flint's reins and began leading them up the ravine. The night settled deeper, thick with cold, and a faint smell of smoke carried from distant homesteads. The cries of coyotes echoed in the distance. Mara shivered despite the blanket. Caleb walked beside the horse, scanning every shadow. Hours later, the fires of the frontier night flickered against the stone walls as they made camp. The valley stretched behind them like a vast, breathing thing. Caleb lit a small fire, its glow touching Mara's weary face. She rocked the baby gently, murmuring soft assurances though her voice trembled. Caleb handed her a tin cup of warmed water. She drank slowly, eyes fixed on flames. After a long silence, she spoke. "My husband, he was an easy man. He made mistakes, dangerous ones. His past caught us." She paused, eyes darkening. "There's more I haven't told you." "I know." Caleb didn't press. Not yet. He sensed her fear ran deeper than bandits or debts. Something else was tangled in her silence. Something that tied her to the dream, to the name she shouldn't have known. He added another branch to the fire. Mara's gaze lifted suddenly, fixed on something behind him. Caleb turned sharply, hand on his revolver. In the far distance, faint, rhythmic, unmistakable, came the sound of hoofbeats. Not one horse. Several. Mara clutched the baby, terror rising like a tide. Caleb's voice was low, steady, edged with the steel of a man who had survived too much to be easily broken. They found your trail. The fire crackled between them, throwing shadows across their faces. The baby whimpered. Mara's eyes glistened with dread. Caleb looked toward the sound, jaw hardening. "We ride at first light," he said. "And whatever you're hiding, tomorrow you tell me the whole of it, because those men aren't tracking you for nothing." The wind howled across the ravine, carrying the faint echo of pursuit. Caleb stood guard through the night, revolver drawn, as Mara held her child close and whispered prayers into the dark. The frontier had made its claim on all three of them, and the danger was only beginning. Dawn crawled over the plains like a wounded animal, slow and heavy, its light thin as bleached bone. Caleb Rowan stood at the edge of the small hollow where they had slept in shifts, his revolver gripped tight in one hand, gaze fixed on the faint dust rising far across the open stretch of land. Riders, distant for now, but closing. The air itself seemed tense, waiting for something to snap. Behind him, Mara Ellison stirred beneath the blanket he had wrapped around her in the late hours of the night. The baby whimpered against her chest, hungry again, though too weak to sob properly. Caleb turned toward them and felt that familiar pull in his chest, the ache of wanting to protect something fragile, even when he had no right to. Mara blinked sleep from her eyes, saw the grimness in his expression, and immediately tightened her hold on the child. "They're coming," she whispered. "Soon enough," he said. "We need to move now." She nodded, exhaustion shadowing her features. She had not slept long, nor well, but fear gave her strength that food and rest hadn't. Caleb saddled Flint quickly, helping Mara climb up with the baby secured in her arms, and then they set off across the uneven terrain, following a narrow trail that wound toward the river. Wind whipped at their faces. The land felt sharp in the morning, the rocks jagged, the air cold enough to sting. Caleb led the horse at a brisk pace, checking over his shoulder every few minutes. The riders behind them were still distant shapes, but the way the dust plume told him everything. They were pushing hard, closing the gap. Mara clutched the baby tighter. "Why do they want us so badly?" she asked. "You haven't told me enough for me to know," Caleb replied. His voice wasn't unkind, but it wasn't gentle either. He needed the truth now, or they would all die for ignorance. Mara looked down at the baby, jaws clenched. "I will," she said. "Just not yet. Please." Caleb bit back frustration. Later, he told himself. If there was a later. The river came into view an hour later, a dark ribbon cutting through the land, swollen from recent rains. Its roar grew louder as they approached, a deep, relentless surge that made Mara blanch. Caleb walked Flint to the edge and studied the current. Fast. Too fast for comfort. He scanned up and down the riverbank. No easier crossing. "We have to go through," he said. Mara shook her head. "With the baby?" Caleb gave her a steady look. "With the baby. He'll drown if we stay on this side." Mara swallowed hard, fear tremoring through her, but she nodded. Caleb took the baby from her, tucking the small body into his coat, close against his chest where warmth still lingered. The tiny head pressed weakly against him, and he felt a surge of protectiveness he didn't have time to examine. "Hold tight," he said as he led Flint step by step into the icy water. Mara held the saddle horn with white-knuckled desperation. The moment the current hit, the horse staggered, nearly losing footing. Caleb grabbed Flint's bridle and braced himself, shivering as cold engulfed him to the waist. Water surged around them, threatening to pull the horse sideways. "Keep your weight steady," Caleb shouted, pushing against the current. Mara tried, but halfway across, her hand slipped. She screamed as she began to slide off the saddle. Caleb lunged, grabbing her arm with his free hand. The baby cried against his chest, voice thin with terror. "Hold on," Caleb bellowed. He heaved her upward with all the strength he had left, muscles burning.
Flint found footing on a submerged rock ridge and lurched forward, giving them the momentum they needed. Moments later, they stumbled onto the far bank, soaked, shaking, but alive. Mara collapsed to her knees as Caleb passed the baby back to her. She clutched the child, breath coming in harsh gasps. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb didn't answer. He was already turning to scan the opposite shore. Sure enough, riders had appeared at the top of the ridge. 5 of them, maybe more behind. They would need to find their own crossing, which bought Caleb and Mara a small lead, but not much. "Move," he said sharply. Mara rose, trembling but determined, and they hurried toward the distant cluster of trees that marked the boundary of Caleb's land. By midday, they crested the final rise, and the small homestead came into view. A modest cabin with a sagging porch, a half-collapsed barn, fencing long overdue for repairs. Caleb felt a pang of something like shame. This was not the refuge he had once imagined building with Anna, but it was what he had. Mara gazed at it quietly, uncertainty clouding her features. "This is your home?" she asked. Caleb nodded once. "It'll hold us for now." Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of dust and old wood smoke. Caleb lit a lantern, casting a warm glow across the cramped space. Mara stepped carefully over the threshold, as though afraid she might disturb something sacred. Her gaze drifted to a rocking chair near the hearth, smooth, worn, clearly much loved, and then to a closed door along the far wall. Caleb noticed. He cleared his throat. "That room was my wife's. I ain't been in there since she passed." Mara lowered her gaze respectfully. "I'm sorry." Caleb nodded, accepting the words without responding. He set about making the place defensible, checking the rifle in the corner, pulling down a crate of ammunition he kept hidden beneath the loose floorboards. Mara watched him for a moment, then said softly, "You live alone out here?" "Been that way a while," he replied. "Men like me don't keep much company." She stroked the baby's back, her voice hesitant. "You kept us alive." "That's different." Caleb shoved aside a chair to place it beneath the window, angling it for cover. "That's just what needed doing." Mara didn't argue. Instead, she took a seat at the table, rocking the baby gently, trying to coax him to feed from a bit of watered-down milk Caleb found sealed in an old tin. After Caleb barricaded the windows and checked the back door, he finally sat across from her. "Tell me the rest," he said. "No more pieces. No half-truths. If I'm risking my neck, I need to know why." Mara breathed out slowly, as though unburdening herself required gathering courage first. "My husband, Daniel, he wasn't entirely honest with me about the life he lived before we married. He told me he worked as a freighter, hauling goods. But after he died, I learned he'd been mixed up with dangerous men." Caleb watched her carefully. "Bandits." She flinched. A gang called the Black Spurs. Former Confederates. Bitter, ruthless. Daniel once rode with them, long before he met me. He left them behind, or so he said. But they didn't forget him. Caleb's jaw tightened. He'd heard of the Black Spurs. Nothing good. "What do they want from you?" Mara reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. Her hands shook as she placed it on the table. Caleb unfolded it. A map. Crude, but clear enough. Canyon markings, distance notations. A spot marked within X. "What's this?" he asked. Mara swallowed hard. "Union payroll gold. A lot of it. Daniel helped steal it during the war. He hid it afterward, planning to return one day, I suppose. But the gang caught up to us before he could tell me everything. They killed him. I ran with the baby." Her voice broke. "I thought I was safe until they found my trail again." Caleb stared at the map, anger simmering low and hot beneath his ribs. "Gold. Always gold." He folded the paper slowly. "Do they know you have this?" "Yes," she whispered. "Daniel told one of them before he died that I knew something. They think if they catch me, they'll get the location." Caleb stood, pacing the cramped space, running a hand down his face. "You should have told me sooner. I was afraid you'd abandon us," she said, voice cracking. "Or turn us in." He looked at her sharply. "I don't turn women and babies over to killers." Her eyes glistened. "I didn't know what kind of man you were." Caleb hesitated, then nodded once. "Fair enough. Trust wasn't cheap on the frontier." Before he could speak again, A distant whistle cut through the stillness, a sharp, warlike sound that made Caleb's stomach drop. Mara stiffened. "They're here." Caleb grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. Through the slats, he saw riders crest the ridge beyond the barn.
6.
Maybe 7. Dust rose behind them like smoke. "Get down," he said. Mara slid to the floor, shielding the baby beneath the table. Caleb checked his ammunition, his mind already calculating angles, cover positions, how long the barricades would hold. The riders advanced slowly, confidently. They knew he was there. They knew Mara was trapped inside. Caleb exhaled once, steadying his aim. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "you keep that child safe." Mara nodded, eyes wide with fear but burning with determination. The first bullet shattered the window, spraying splinters across the room. The battle began. Rifle fire echoed across the ridge, sharp and merciless. Caleb took down the first attacker with a clean shot to the shoulder, sending the man tumbling from his horse. Another dismounted behind the barn, firing toward the door. Caleb shifted positions, moving low, firing again, feeling the familiar bite of recoil. The cabin shook under the assault. Mara cried out as a stray bullet tore through the table leg beside her. The baby wailed. For a moment, chaos swallowed the world. Smoke drifted through the open window. Flames flickered outside. The barn had been set ablaze. Caleb gritted his teeth. They meant to burn him out. He fired through the doorway, hitting another rider. A shout rang out from behind the cabin. Hoofbeats thundered close. Caleb ducked just as 2 bullets punched through the wall near his head. "They won't stop," Mara whispered, tears gathering. Caleb moved beside her, reloading quickly. "They will," he said, "if we make them."
Outside, the gang regrouped, circling like wolves preparing for a final charge. Caleb checked the rifle one last time. He could hold them off for a while, but not forever, not without help, not without a miracle. As the flames from the burning barn cast flickering light across the ridge, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Fierce. Burning. Unshakable. He looked at Mara and the tiny life she protected. "They want the gold," he said quietly, "but they'll have to go through me first." Mara met his gaze, and for the first time, her fear did not eclipse her hope. The riders spurred forward. Caleb braced himself. The cabin trembled under the weight of the coming violence. The frontier had chosen its moment, and the reckoning had arrived. The storm rolled off the ridge just as Ethan Hale tightened the saddle cinch, the sky bruised and heavy like it meant to drown the whole valley before dawn. He could feel the change coming, the way a man feels a tremor under his boots before the land splits. Mara stood behind him, one arm wrapped around her baby, the other clutching the blanket he had given her days ago when she'd first collapsed beside his horse. Her face was pale beneath the gathering dark, but her voice held steady when she spoke his name. Ethan didn't answer at first. He was listening, to the wind, to the trees leaning one way then snapping back, and to the faint echo of hooves that didn't belong to him. Cole Laramie was close. The same outlaw who had hunted Mara across the prairie. The same man who had murdered her husband and sworn she would not live to tell it. Ethan could almost feel Cole's breath creeping up the trail. He swung himself onto his horse and reached down for Mara. She hesitated, the baby stirring against her chest, and then placed her foot into the stirrup as he pulled her up behind him. When her arm circled his waist, he felt the tremble in her hands. Not fear, resolve. She'd run as far as she could. Now they would make their stand. They rode hard through the timber until the trees thinned and the river showed its silver coils in the dark. The water roared louder than usual, swollen by the storm. Ethan pulled up and scanned the crossing. The river was their best chance to cover their tracks, but it would be a hell of a gamble with a baby and a woman who could barely sit upright. Mara leaned forward against him, her breath warm on his back. "We can make it," she whispered, though her voice shook. He wanted to believe her. Maybe he did. But belief didn't change the river. He swung down, helping her dismount. Rain started to fall, sharp and cold, pricking at their skin. The clouds split with a roll of thunder. Ethan took the reins and led the horse to the water's edge, testing the current with his boot. Strong. Too strong. He looked back at Mara, who clutched the child tighter. The infant whimpered, sensing the weight of the moment. Ethan shook his head. We waited out. Laramie's close, but the river will kill us faster. Mara lowered her gaze, a long breath leaving her chest. She didn't argue, though he could see the fear tightening her shoulders. They found shelter beneath a rock overhang a few yards upstream, a shallow cave carved by years of storms like this one. Ethan gathered brush and driftwood and coaxed a small flame to life. The fire crackled weakly, casting trembling shadows on the stone walls. Mara sank to the ground, rocking the baby slowly, murmuring soft words only a mother would know. Ethan watched her from the edge of the firelight. She had changed since that morning. He found her asleep beside his horse, dust in her hair, desperation etched into every line of her face. Now she looked carved from steel. She had run from Laramie for 2 days before she collapsed, too exhausted to speak. When she whispered Ethan's late wife's name in her sleep, he nearly dropped the canteen he held. It wasn't a name a stranger should have known. Not out here. Not on this trail. But this was not the moment for questions. The night deepened. The storm raged on. Lightning flashed across the sky, like the earth was cracking open. Ethan stood near the cave mouth, one hand resting on his revolver, watching the river churn and listening for hoofbeats. Mara drifted into restless sleep, the baby warm against her. Ethan turned his head every time she stirred, as though guard duty demanded he count each breath she took. Maybe it did. Close to midnight, he heard it, low, distant, unmistakable. Hoofbeats, muffled by rain but steady. Ethan moved quickly, dousing the fire with his hat. Darkness swallowed them whole. Mara jolted upright. Panic in her eyes. The baby clutched close. Ethan crouched beside her, his hand closing around her wrist to steady her. "He's coming," she whispered, though the words barely formed. Ethan nodded. He could feel Laramie's presence like a stain in the air. The hoofbeats grew louder. Closer. Ethan motioned for Mara to move deeper into the cave. She rose slowly, keeping the baby pressed tight against her chest. Ethan drew his gun, crouched low, breath steady. He had one chance to catch Laramie off guard, one chance to end this. A shadow appeared at the cave mouth, tall and lean, a silhouette cut sharp by a flash of lightning. "Ethan Hale." Cole Laramie's voice drawled, dripping with mock admiration. "I should have known you'd be the one fool man stand in my way." Ethan didn't respond. Laramie stepped inside, the smell of wet leather and gunpowder following him. "You got something belongs to me. The woman. The kid." Ethan's jaw clenched. Laramie took another step, his gun gleaming in the faint light filtering from the storm outside. "Now, why don't you hand him over nice and easy?" Ethan fired. The cave exploded with sound. Laramie stumbled back, hitting the stone with a grunt, but he didn't fall. He fired wildly, bullets sparking off rock, the shots deafening. Mara screamed, shielding the baby with her body. Ethan lunged sideways, returning fire, the flashes lighting the cave in violent bursts. Laramie's next bullet tore through Ethan's shoulder, spinning him against the wall. Pain surged through him like fire, hot and blinding. Mara cried out his name. Laramie advanced, limping but smiling like a devil who already smelled victory. "Should have stayed out of this. Hale, ain't your fight." Ethan clenched his teeth and steadied himself, blood soaking through his shirt. "It is now," he growled. Mara's sobs echoed behind him. The baby wailed. Laramie raised his gun, aiming at Mara. Time slowed. Ethan pushed off the wall with every ounce of strength he had left and threw himself at Laramie. The force knocked them both to the ground, guns clattering across the stone floor. Laramie snarled and swung, his fist cracking against Ethan's jaw. Ethan struck back, driving his elbow into Laramie's ribs. Rain poured into the cave from the entrance, the storm winds roaring like an audience to their hellish struggle. Laramie clawed for his gun. Ethan grabbed his wrist, twisting hard. Laramie howled, rolling toward the fallen revolver. Ethan lunged. His hand closed around Laramie's gun first. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. Laramie went still. The storm raged on, but the cave fell silent except for Ethan's ragged breaths and Mara's soft, shuddering sobs. Ethan dropped the gun and pressed his hand to his bleeding shoulder. Mara crawled toward him, her baby quiet now, eyes wide with fear and relief. She touched his cheek with trembling fingers. "You saved us," she whispered. Ethan shook his head, pain cutting through him. "Just bought us time." Mara's tears fell onto his skin. "We need to get you help." By dawn, the storm had passed. The river had calmed enough to cross. Ethan could barely stand, but Mara helped him into the saddle and climbed up behind him, steadying him with her arm. The baby slept between them, wrapped in the last dry blanket. Ethan guided the horse into the water, the current tugging at them but not strong enough to drag them under. They made it to the far bank just as the sun rose, painting the world gold. Ethan was fading fast by the time the small frontier town appeared on the horizon. Mara tightened her hold around him. "Stay with me," she pleaded. He forced his eyes open, fixing them on the road ahead. When they finally reached the doctor's house, Mara half carried him to the door, banging until it opened. The doctor pulled Ethan inside while Mara held her baby close, watching with a heart that felt torn in two. Hours passed. The doctor worked. Mara prayed. When the door finally creaked open, Ethan stood there, pale but alive, his shoulder bandaged tight. Mara gasped, a sob breaking free. Ethan stepped toward her slowly. She met him halfway, tears streaming down her cheeks. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. Outside, the sun climbed higher, warming the earth after a long night of storm and bloodshed. The danger was gone, but everything between them had changed forever. They made their way into town, the baby cradled safely in Mara's arms. Neighbors peered from behind weathered shutters, wary eyes taking the sight of a man barely standing, a woman marked by fear and determination, and the evidence of what had been endured. The sheriff, a tall man with a face like hammered steel, stepped forward. "You two made it?" he asked, voice sharp but tinged with awe. Mara nodded. Ethan swayed but held himself upright. "Yes," he rasped. "We made it." The town rallied around them. Someone brought blankets, another fetched hot tea, and a stable boy led Flint into barn, brushing away mud and storm. Mara held the baby close, feeling warmth return to her frozen limbs. Ethan sank into a chair. The first time in days he could afford to let his body remember exhaustion without thinking of danger. Mara knelt beside him, running her hand through his hair, fingers sticky with blood that had dried on his temple. "You'll be all right," she said softly. He nodded, not trusting his voice. That afternoon, word spread quietly but quickly. Laramie's men would not follow. The townsfolk had seen what it meant to face a man who refused to die, and tales of Ethan's defense through the storm would echo in whispers along the frontier. Mara allowed herself to exhale for the first time in days, her baby cooing softly against her chest, oblivious of the peril that had stalked them. Ethan looked at her, his eyes shadowed but steady. "We're not out of the woods," he murmured. Mara shook her head, smiling faintly. "No, but we've got each other, and that's enough to start." Even as the sun set, casting long shadows over the town, Ethan and Mara knew the frontier would remain a land of hard choices, of danger lurking just beyond the ridge. But they had survived. Together, the baby stirred, a soft hand brushing Ethan's cheek. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to hope. Hope for tomorrow. Hope for a life rebuilt from the ashes of violence. A life where Mara's name, spoken beside his horse, no longer haunted him but led him forward. And so they stayed, surrounded by wary but loyal neighbors, finding shelter and warmth, letting the days stretch long and slow, while the storm of the past receded into memory. The frontier had tested them, burned them, and yet left them standing, together, alive and unbroken.